Simon.
Hello.
Hey, Simon.
Hello.
Hey, Simon, it's Skylar.
Simon?
How you
Hey,
doing?
Simon.
Hello, Simon.
What's up, Simon?
Hello.
How you doing?
Hey,
Hello.
Hello.
Simon.
Hello, Simon.
Hello, Simon.
Hi. Conversations with storytellers. Wisdom, folk and fairy tales from our elders. A meeting with professional storytellers. After the passing of some great storytellers, I decided I wanted to interview some of the elders in the community of traditional storytelling. I wanted to capture their thoughts, their ideas, and maybe ideals in their own voices. I didn't want a traditional interview, but a conversation with these folks. Some will tell us their favourite stories. Others will share their thoughts on our profession. Some will give us glimpses of their lives and the lives of those around them, who their mentors and inspirations were or are. All of them share gems of wisdom. This and the following conversation, along with the podcast episode of Lauren Namey, were all recorded at Sharing the Fire, the North East Storytelling Conference. Because of this, the interviews have been shorter than I might have liked. They were in rooms otherwise being used or about to be used, and we had other commitments to get to. Still, I'm glad I was able to talk with these folks one-on-one. This particular conversation is with Elisa Pearmain. I have known Elisa for a long while. Over the years I've done workshops with her, heard her tell her stories, read her books, listened to her recordings. She has always inspired my work and made me look at myself more closely and deeply, not just as a storyteller but also as a human being. Elisa is one of the people who began and helped build the storytelling movement in the Boston area in the northeast of the USA back in the day. She worked with and alongside some of the best storytellers New England has to offer. She is, in her own right, an amazing storyteller. Elisa has worked with and through healing from the beginning of her career, creating projects seemingly before their time. Elisa was and still is a dancer, a storyteller, and a healer. And she smiles all the time, which I love, sharing her compassion and light wherever she goes. During this interview, you'll hear Elisa mention Doug, Jay, and Judith. These folks are Doug Lippman, Jay O'Callaghan, and the remarkable Judith Black. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Elisa Pearmain. Elisa, thank you so much for joining me here today. I don't know how long that I've known you for, but it's been a long while. I think I went to one of your workshops before I heard you tell tales, and then when I heard you tell tales, it was just like, wow, this is amazing. You're one of the most compassionate people that I've met, with a heart the size of a planet, and I love you to death.
Oh, thank you.
What I'd like to ask you is, if you would, is to tell me a little bit about your childhood growing up. What was it like?
Well, in a lot of ways it was wonderful, because we lived in the country down a long driveway surrounded by woods and swamps and little knolls, and we spent most of our time outside playing in said places, building little houses in the woods and climbing trees, and so I feel very connected and comfortable in those surroundings. And my family, I'm the oldest,
Okay.
and so I did tell stories to my siblings, especially at nights when we all had to sleep in the same room for one reason or another.
Okay.
And my dad loved to tell stories, family stories mostly, but also sometimes, off-color jokes and things.
Oh, really? Like all good dads.
Yeah. And, so there's a nice history of family, people keeping the history and telling the stories of the history
Of the family.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Did he also do stories that were about his environment around him? Not the environment, but like what it was like growing up in for him as a kid.
Yeah. Well, his dad left suddenly when he was about, I think, 15, but he had this idyllic picture of his dad, and so he told a lot of stories about how they had this house on the Cape, and how his dad would go and dive under the water and bring up lobsters, and how he would take him out fishing, and he taught him how to sail, and taught him how to fish for trout in the streams, and so there was a lot of that.
So your family, was all your family kind of woodsy, if you were?
Not my mother's side, not so much.
Okay.
But that was his experience, and his dad became an organic farmer. That was what he tried to do for a living for a long time, and so there was a lot of that.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So do you think he was one of the biggest influences on you?
Yeah, my dad. Interesting that we have a lot in common compared to my mom and siblings.
Yeah.
We're much more outgoing and jovial, and I might appear shy compared to the average person, but in my family, I'm the most sort of obnoxious.
Type A, obnoxious word to say. So do you have any favourite stories from your childhood that you remember?
Stories from my childhood.
Or books?
Well,
kids' books?
He mostly at night he would come to the bedroom, and he played ukulele and he played accordion. So every night, mostly, we would sing the old, very typical songs like "Oh Susanna, Don't You Cry for Me," and we loved it. So we did a lot of singing. Of course, I read I was read to a lot of the stories as well. I know later I loved The Secret Garden, and just the idea of it, having a secret, and I've always wanted that since, a place I could go with walls around it and be among plants and flowers.
I've had similar. Of course, English gardens are very much like that.
Oh, they are.
They're
yes,
tiny,
they are.
So
because all you need is
stuff.
You don't need a lot of space.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So.
I love wall gardens. They're so much fun.
Yeah.
So the music thing. Did you pick up on any of the music? I've never
not
seen
musical,
Really?
but we also danced. He loved to dance. Both my parents loved to dance, and so a lot of nights after dinner we did roll back the rug and put on music. So yeah, I've been dancing since I could waltz on my father's shoes, and so before I was a storyteller, I was a dancer, always trying to make up dances. Yeah, that's how I got into it. Was I would choreograph something, and nobody would know what. I was trying to tell a story, but nobody knew what the story was.
So what kind of stories were these?
Oh gosh, if I can remember, because this was back, in my earlier 20s.
So were they original stories?
No, they weren't it wasn't like I had I didn't understand then the nature of story the way I do now, with beginning, middle, end, but trying to depict something,
All right.
some kind of scene with emotional, with characters and feelings, and people didn't get it the way I wanted them to.
Right.
But then luckily along came this group called the Wallflower Order from California. It was a dance theater troupe of women, very political women, and they were having this 2-week workshop. So I went, and we did a lot of dancing, but we also all choreographed our own sort of stories or poetry in the beginning with dance. So that was my first experience putting words to movement.
Right.
And then a bunch of us stayed together afterwards, and we began to really tell stories of our experiences. And this is where you might have heard this story before, where we all were telling stories about difficult experiences we had had with sort of violence and empowerment. And I had been in my early 20s in a relationship, my first love, that turned violent and abuse, verbally and physically abusive. And so I told that story, and it was completely transformative for me.
Oh, I imagine.
I went from being from being ashamed that I hadn't gotten out sooner, because it was, it was the 70s. It was women's lib, and everybody's supposed to be, strong. And
Yeah, but that's difficult.
The situation was impossible, very isolated. But in the process of it, I was able to re-step into the shoes of who I'd been and to kind of get why it was so hard to stand up for myself, to fight back, or to get away, and so then the empathy and the really moving through it, and then allowing the anger to come out in the movement, and then came the tears, and then came just a much stronger sense of, boy, I don't deserve that, and no one does. And so, it was really wonderful because we did our stories for the community, and then I did it for some battered women's groups and stuff, and someone said to me along the line, this is storytelling, and hey, they're doing this in Boston,
So you went to Boston?
Yeah, and that's where I saw Jay and Lee Ellen and Doug, and took a class with Lee Ellen, and then a bunch of classes with Doug, and it was all down the smooth hill into Storyland from there.
That's great. So the stories that you first started telling, were they traditional stories or were they folktale? Because I know you as a folktale teller.
Yeah, but the very first story, after I told that story, the next one was I interviewed a whole bunch of Vietnam veterans about their experiences. And combined with reading a lot of stories and telling, I put on a one-woman show in the first person of someone who'd been through the experience, sort of pulling all the stories together. And
composite character.
Yeah, and Storytellers in Concert, you've probably heard of that, which was Judith and Doug and Jennifer Justice. Jay had been in it, but I think he'd moved on by then. So I did it there, and I did a bunch of other places, some for high school kids. But it was right when the movie Nam came out, and there was another one, Full Metal Jacket, I think. And so everybody, everybody was just Vietnam, and so it became harder to sell, but still it was an amazing experience.
Right. So did you tell? So you were talking to vets. Were you telling the story as a female vet or as a male vet?
Male vet.
Were there many female vets back?
Nurses. There were a lot of nurse stories, but
no soldiers, were there?
No, but a lot of nurses who had some of the worst experiences from what they saw and what they couldn't do about it,
Right.
But just back then I was very slender and had short hair, and it worked. It worked.
Wow, that must have been
so.
Have you resurrected that story at all?
No.
Thought about it?
I've thought, but no. But because it was harder to get a lot of work there, I went into the Boston Public Schools, and I was a storyteller in residence for about 10 years.
Wow.
So that's when I got into the folk tales, because the population is so wonderfully diverse that I had to learn stories from Cambodia and Puerto Rico and African American stories, and you name it, Russian, so that's when I really started to research and love the folk tales.
Yeah. I have as you know, I have a huge passion for folk and fairy tales as well. So I'm going to jump around a little bit. What do you think is a big power that folk tales have over personal tales? And it's not a trick question or anything like that. Right. But what do you think? What do you think folk and fairy tales offer that's different to personal tales? Maybe that's a better question.
Well, I think they give everybody something to relate to. They have a form that, even though good personal tales have the same form, they allow everyone to, they're universal, and so they allow everybody to sort of imagine themselves in that situation, and they allow you to be open-minded and empathize with all different types of characters, and to see yourself and relate, to those characters, which can be very true with a personal tale as well. But I think just learning, hearing.
Because there's so many archetypes. Do you think that's probably what it is?
Yeah, and the structure, just knowing the structure, that there's a character with a problem, and they get help and meet people that help them along the way, and then they come out with it. They come out in the end with a solution, and they're better off, or the world is better off, or something's better off. I mean, those are the ones worth telling in my mind.
Yeah.
That's our lives, right?
Yeah. Oh, it totally is. It totally is. What lights your eyes up when you're telling stories?
Well, just really becoming the characters.
Yeah.
Just really stepping into their shoes. That's when I have the most fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I've heard you tell, and also on your CD, you can hear it on the CD. You really get a sense that you do become that character, and that you are, you've taken on their mantle and their shoes and their hat and their scarf, whatever.
Yeah.
It's remarkable. I love listening to your stories. But anyway, you work a lot with schools, and you teach a lot about compassion, how to overcome bullying. It seems that school-age children working with the issues of growing up is something you're really passionate about.
Yeah, I'm not doing it as much as I have, but yes, for a long time I did the bullying program. There was a lot of call for it.
Yeah.
And it's so tough. I mean, it's been going on since you and I were kids, and it's still going on.
Do you think there's more compassion now, though?
Not necessarily. I think there's still the same kids that are struggling and not feeling any power, and so they take it out on other kids who appear vulnerable. I think that's just so classic. I mean, I think we're trying to build compassion and empathy, trying to help, the bystander to see that they have a choice, that they don't have to take a side, and that they can do things. I mean, that was sort of the most, I think, valuable part of my program, which, like I said, I don't do as much anymore, but was teaching them, literally telling stories and teaching them ways of standing and helping the bystander to move away, physically and emotionally, to surround them and have ways to talk back.
So what kind of work are you doing now then, if you're not doing the bullying stuff?
Well, because I work as a psychotherapist as well, I my focus mostly is on the therapeutic aspects of story.
Okay.
And so I do a lot of work in churches, mostly Unitarian and Congregationalist, anyone who'll have me, but that tends to be. So people will call up and say, we're doing this theme on, like it was Journey Stories, the one I did last weekend, and what can you do? Because they like me to tell stories and weave in the theme. So I did a whole thing on hero story, the hero journey, hero-heroine journey. And that was really fun. It definitely is work, because you're having to think about how to talk in between the stories. And but usually I can find, I do a lot of my mindfulness work, a lot of my forgiveness story programs. Someone wanted me to come in to do white privilege, and I have a story from my own growing up that I shared. So it's lovely because it's creative. You're not just, here I go with my same old thing again, which was nice, but
it's also what Bill said yesterday. It's work.
That's right. It is tons of work, which So that tends to be where I am doing my storytelling mostly, because I don't market anymore to the schools. I just don't have time. But that, and I really love teaching, like I did yesterday, the telling your own story work. And I'm still writing this book. I've been writing since my CD came out in 2013.
So this is going to be the companion book to the Forgiveness CD?
Yeah.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, and I've been writing it now for
That's
6 years.
It's going to be a big book.
It is, and
I mean, based on the fact that it's 2 CDs.
Right, and it's not so much a companion as it's a real expansion.
Right, okay.
So, and the model that I'm using now, which I'm still not convinced I'll keep, is sort of like my first book, Doorways, where there are 52 tales that you move through the tasks of the forgiveness process, starting with just understanding what it is and understanding, remembering stories you already have of being forgiven and forgiving others, and moving into grief, what we lose when something happens that that needs forgiveness. There's always grief there, and then the whole thing of shifting perspectives to help us to have empathy for ourselves and others, and looking at anger and what we get from it. And so it's just this long, and then it moves into just sharing some biographical stories of others who've done it, and the whole while it's helping people to be working on their own stories.
Right.
So it's big.
Project. Yeah. So you graduated from Lesley in 1998, and you've had a practice as a licensed psychotherapist for about 15 years. Is that right?
Yeah.
When did you take on the psychotherapist part, and why?
My very first work after the Vietnam stories, I started leading workshop. Maybe it was even before, from my work doing telling, what was it called? Dancing. Her Stories in Motion is what our first group thing was called. Mm-hmm. So I started leading groups of women way back in my home or other people's, and we would do like an 8 or 9 week thing. And always that was my interest, was seeing sort of how healing happens. That was the same with the Vietnam story, is how does this character finally get to the point where he can grieve? He's gone to the wall and he finds that he's looking for his own name on the wall, and how hard it was to get to grief and to healing, and that was what interested me most. So then I sort of found that interest in helping women to tell their stories, and then helping anyone to tell their stories, and it's just always been my interest. And through my own experiences, wanting to be able to share things with people that might be hard to share, just to help make it easier. So it's always been there.
Yeah, it opens the door. When you share your own personal story, especially with something as hard as that.
Yeah.
Because people don't want to talk about that stuff. And if you open a door and make yourself vulnerable, then it gives them the opportunity to think, well, if they can do it, then maybe I can.
Exactly.
And it might not open the door all the way, but it might unlock,
give some permission. That's right.
And let a little bit of light in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's so much of suffering, is feeling that we're alone.
Yeah.
So much of it. Yeah.
You are very well read on a lot of different religions and beliefs. Where does that come from? What drives that interest of yours?
Well, straight out of...
Which I love, because I'm similar.
You are, I can tell, yeah. Writing my first book, Doorways, I wanted little short gems of wisdom from all around the world. And so I started, I spent so much time in the library back then, because that's all there was. And, working with the Margaret Reed MacDonald's motif index, and I'd find a story that I loved, but I wanted to see if it was from other cultures, so I would read about those other cultures. And so I just, from the Sufi masters to reading about the, what is it called? My brain's not working. The Hasidic masters, reading those stories, as well as, from every culture of the world, the Buddhist stories. And I've studied Buddhism. I do some meditation, and so I've perhaps studied that most deeply.
Do you label yourself or align more with one of the religions that you studied?
Well, I was
Which I know is
raised.
a really hard question.
I was raised as a Unitarian, which is a very gentle form of Christianity, which Jesus as a storyteller teacher, who got enlightened, and it was just a big fountain of love, and that sounds good to me. But I do practice Buddhist meditation, Vipassana. But I just think it's so wonderful to pull from all the religions, because they all have so much wisdom to share.
They do.
So that's the food.
yeah. When I started reading the Ramayana, I realized there was, an even even more. There's even more to learn.
Oh,
You know, you can read the Bhagavad Gita, but that's just like it's like a slither of a fingernail on a whole body of mythology and belief. It's
tremendous.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing.
Yeah.
What do you think has been your most rewarding work that you've done, either collectively with other people or on your own?
Well, I guess the forgiveness work, because it really transcends storytelling and my therapeutic worlds, that now a lot of people who come to me come because they see that I help with forgiveness process.
Right.
So I think that feels that way now, though of course back then it was being in the Boston public schools and helping the shy little kids whose chins were sewn to their chest to to look up and see people smiling at them as they told their story. So it's the full gamut of helping people feel good.
Having this discussion, and learning more about you, it seems that there's definitely this path that you found very early on, and that path has become more focused, but it's also become broader at the same time in the process from being a dancer to help heal women to a forgiveness program that heals everyone. It seems, at least from the conversation, do you see that as well?
Yeah.
It's really cool that
Yeah.
that trajectory is.
I know, it's lovely to look at our paths, isn't
I know,
it?
right? Because I know when I look at my path, it goes all over. It's
That's
like the
right.
most crooked path.
But yet, I have this image as a basket, and all along the way, we are gathering things into our basket. Then, when we get, further along, they all become useful. Every single one of them.
And I like, what I like about that analogy is that, as we get to our silver years, we have this basket filled with fruit, and then we can give that fruit back.
That's right.
To other people.
That's right.
What an amazing analogy! I love that.
Yeah. Well, it's
You're brilliant. You really have.
It came along at a time when I was thinking, what the hell? Stick to one thing.
Yeah, right. All right. Sorry. What was your most unexpected and enjoyable workshop or gig that you've done?
I was invited to come to a school that was moving. It was a special school.
Okay.
They had had a principal for like 30 years, and they'd been in this really old building, and they were very arts-oriented, and they were different from the rest of the town. It's the McCarthy Town School in Acton, Massachusetts. And the principal had just left, and they had to move into a modern school they would share with another school.
Right.
And they asked me to come collect stories from the history of the school and tell them in segments, one a week for about 10 weeks. And each week a different grade would draw pictures from the stories and put them up on the walls.
Oh, wow.
So I went in and I began talking to the teachers and the principal I talked to a lot, who'd been there so long. And this theme of animal stories just abounded. Because it was such an old building, there were constantly animals getting into the school and, being brought in, and they were very relaxed and allowing. And it just occurred to me that the best way to tell it was for me to be a little mouse named Maddie, who had come in on the first day of school into the principal's office and had lived there ever since and had seen everything. And because of being an animal, was there at night and was there for all the special happenings that went on, and it really worked. Everybody, loved Maddie, and the stories were just, some of them were so beautiful and compassionate and moving, and so it was really fun and really different.
Yeah, that's so cool. I love the fact that you became the little mouse.
Of course. Well, don't you find that a lot? I find that a lot. I do a lot of first-person Because sometimes I just can't get something off the ground. It's just like clunk.
Yeah.
And as soon as I step into the character in first person, it has life,
Yeah.
right? So that's familiar to me.
That's really cool. I
Yeah.
like that a lot.
Yeah.
So you've been doing this for a long time, and you've met a lot of storytellers. But correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that you're very much based and being set in New England. Am I right?
Yes.
So most of the storytellers, I imagine, are those that live and work in New England or have been visiting New England. Of the storytellers that you've met, who do you think had the biggest influence on you?
Well, as a teller, definitely Jay O'Callahan, because of the way he embodies characters and just
Yes.
loves them to death, you know.
Yeah.
So, and he was one of the first I saw.
Right.
We had the Three Apples Festival out in Harvard, Mass, and he told his, what was her name, story. His elbows bruised the air.
Yes.
And, so that was my, as soon as I saw him, because that was when I was still working on my dance Battered Woman piece, it was like, yes, this is it. This is what I have to do. And so that was wonderful. But then Doug, I did take a lot of classes with Doug, and he was just so positive.
Yeah.
And I remember, he was helping me work on my Vietnam stories, and we couldn't think of a good title. And I was actually helping him. I was working as his little office person at the time,
Oh, really?
He also taught me how to use a computer. It was way back then. We had the little tiny Macs. And one day I came into work, and he had written on a big sign on the outside of the door of his office. It said, "The Defoliated Heart." And that became the title of my piece, my
Wow.
Vietnam piece. Yeah, so he definitely believed in me and helped me along
That's
a
so cool.
lot. Yeah,
That's very
and so.
He's a very compassionate teacher, coach.
Oh, he's so much so. Yeah, he just loves bringing people along.
He does.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
If there was a storyteller that you haven't yet met, either living or dead, that you would like to swap stories with, who would that be, do you think?
There's someone, and I'm not remembering her name, who Penny, my friend Penny Post, used to live out in California, and she knew all the tellers out there, and she's often saying to me, "Oh, you would have just loved this person. That you have so much in common. Your telling is just like theirs." But now I can't think of her name, so that doesn't do us a lot of good.
That's all right.
Yeah, someone who I don't know if he's still alive anymore is Michael Cotter, who was from Wisconsin, and I met him at the National Storytelling, and then he had me come out there, just farmer on a farm, but told the most beautiful stories. I think I love that kind of down-to-earth family, some hard stories,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, if you're a farmer, that's
yeah.
not an easy life.
Yeah, and my grandfather tried to be.
Yeah. My grandfather was. He worked on farms. He was a cowboy.
Was he?
Yeah.
Oh, neat. Yeah. So, so I haven't answered your question too well.
Sorry.
I love Elizabeth Ellis. I love listening to her, and
Yeah,
she's also a very generous
she is.
storyteller.
Yeah, she's a remarkable woman. We have some really good people in
In the movement.
the movement.
In the
Yeah,
world,
for sure,
yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to a young teller coming up who wants to do this? What advice would you give them?
Yeah. To really honor their unique gifts, right? Because it's so easy to see other people and think, oh, I should be like them.
Right.
But it's when you find your own way, which is one thing that Doug did. Our first class, he had us all tell the same story, and everybody thought, oh, holy crap, what is this going to kill us all? Because we're going to be competing. But they were 7 or 8 completely different stories.
Yeah.
And mine was told standing up as sort of with a lot of movement in it, which I love, and that helped. That really cemented for me right there that
Right.
You could be Jackie Torrance sitting in a chair and never moving and just wowing everyone with your your face. Your facial expressions are somebody's whose voice just can, go everywhere, or your humor, or, we all have our own gifts, and we don't have to be everything.
Anybody else. We need to be our unique selves.
Yeah, because that's we're bringing that basket of life experience with us, and that's half of it too, is what we've learned and heard, and that makes us who we are.
Yeah.
So that would be my advice.
Do you have a favourite story at the moment that you like to tell?
My favorite, funnest story to tell is one that I told a few years ago at the Olio, the fear monster story. It's an Egyptian folk tale about a boy who's afraid of everything, and his father sends him out on a...
Would you like to tell it?
Well, it's
Or is it too long?
about 12 minutes long, but just it's so much fun. He meets a rabbit. His father sends him out on a quest to find his courage and overcome his fear, right?
Uh-huh.
And he meets a rabbit on the road who, is a mindful, says, observation. Young man rushing down the path is in mortal danger, trips and falls over a rock, and lies there trembling. What on earth is going on? And he tells him, and he says, perhaps I could, pick me up, I could give you some advice. And he teaches him about being in the present moment like a rabbit has to be, right? And so he learns to, instead of worrying about what could happen, he thinks about what is happening, and he eventually meets the fear monster and learns that things are always worse when we imagine them than when we meet them in the moment. And, that's a very short version, but it's just so much fun to tell. There's so many wonderful characters in it, and it's so true,
Yeah.
We're all so anxious these days and not able to be in the moment.
There's a lot of distraction on all sorts of different levels.
Oh my gosh, isn't there?
And I think that is a huge problem that the younger generations are going to have, because of the spinning that happens everywhere.
Oh, I know.
I look at, I use Facebook and Instagram, and I've noticed that the ads are changing in their style, and they're becoming more personal. Like,
yes.
It sounds like it looks like somebody's doing a YouTube video about something or other, but it's not. It's an ad.
Yes.
And the news is almost like that. There's spin, and because the internet is so huge and so accessible, people can put whatever they want up, which is great for freedom of speech, and it's great for ideas and all the rest of it. And it also means that there are these haters and trolls that put stuff up there that people watch and believe.
That's right, because we're all so afraid. They believe anything they hear.
Right.
It's playing havoc with our sense of unity in this country and our well-being.
It's not just here. It's
everywhere.
I think it's global.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. It's, a lot of people bash America, but it's like, no, it's going on everywhere. I talk to my family back home, and it's crazy. So is there any last piece of advice or wisdom or thought that you'd like to share with our listeners here?
Well, I think if I think about some of the story images that are most powerful for me, they're the ones where you meet the character, the disguised helper.
Yes.
Who looks like the most hideous woman, with no teeth and horse-like hair and red eyes, and she says, well, you can drink from the well, but you've got to give me a kiss, Or the woman at the bottom of the river wrapped in old fish line and saying, lick my sores, and you're like, run in the other direction, But that's you tending to yourself and being willing to face all parts of yourself and love all of who you are. It's that being willing to stay and saying, of course, I'm going to honor the divinity in all of us, honor the oneness,
right.
That we're all the same, and we, that disguise helps us to then, if we can face it, we can face anything in ourselves and heal. So that's, I guess, those are the most profound places in story that I like people to be able to go to, and in real life too, of course, right?
Yeah.
We're all disguised helpers
Right.
and mentors.
Yeah. Some of us not so disguised.
That's right. But
yeah.
right.
We are.
Yeah. So I guess that would be my parting thought.
Well, thank you so much for doing this interview. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. It's so
Thanks
much
for
fun.
You
Yeah.
enjoyed it. Thanks, Elisa, for taking time out of the conference to have this conversation with me. We had a good time and not too few laughs along the way either. I hope you, my listeners, enjoyed the conversation as much as I did and learned much about how traditional tales can be used to help heal. Thanks to Ben Schultz, who provided the music for my podcast. Creating this show is very much a labour of love. To help keep this podcast going and to help create more, please consider making a donation. You can do this through my Patreon page, www.patreon.com/Simon Brooks. There's no E in Brooks. $1 a month, a $20 bill if you want. A single donation if you like a particular episode will all help me reach out further and create more of these conversations and make them better. If not, it's no big deal. We all have bills to pay, I understand. If you can, and I know you can, leave a review on Stitcher, iTunes, wherever else you found this episode. It helps not just me, but it helps others find this podcast too. Please jump on the interwebs and find out more about my guests. Follow them and me if you like. All of my guests are tremendous storytellers, which is why I asked them to join me. Again, thanks for listening and being there. I hope you join me for the next episode of Conversations with Storytellers, when the guest will be... Shh, it's a secret. Think about sharing an email with me, telling me what you liked most about this particular interview or any other conversation you have heard on my podcast. I would love to know. Until next time. Hey, Tim, what are you doing next week?